Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining me here on this podcast episode. Today's podcast, the topic of it, we're going to talk about safety. More specifically, I want to kind of dive into some of the mechanisms of an article that I was reading recently while I was, on the job site, and I thought, well, this is an interesting article. This is going to become a pretty fascinating podcast topic. And while I was looking into it, it kind of resonated with me a little bit. And here's the reason why. So for those of you who do not know, I am the safety manager for it's one of the hats I wear for the company that I'm employed by. I wear all other hats. At times, I may end up having to go out into the field and be a superintendent or a construction manager, depending on the need of the customer, time frame, and et cetera. But my actual official job title for the vast majority of my time is a safety manager. And I have been involved in safety for a very long time. We're talking about probably 18, 19 years now, give or take, something to that effect. It actually started when I was relatively new in the trade. What happened is I was working someplace, and every contractor was requested that they send somebody in, like what we were talking about, like a safety kind of committee, if you will. And so that's kind of how it got started. And so I've paid attention ever since. And, from the safety perspective, I'm a big fan of individuals who are promoted from within. It's my assessment that those of us in the trades, or those people that are field personnel, they make the best safety managers possible. And it's not a slight against anybody who, achieves that spot, or, gets, let's say, promoted or gets hired on for that spot because of your experience elsewhere. It's just that we are intimately aware of the safety problems that are present on the job site. We are acutely aware of what takes place, of what people's perspectives are, of what the customer, what they ask. Sometimes they're double standards. And quite frankly, sometimes there are various companies, certainly not the company that I work for right now, but there are companies that can employ skilled tradesmen and women who, when production is up against, let's say, something that is inherently unsafe, we are aware that it's unsafe and we bring it up. There are some that will push it off to the side. Additionally, we're also aware of the empty rhetoric. And the empty rhetoric, by what I mean by that is, whenever I see a company, from whether it's documents or it could be social media posts or whatever it happens to be, whenever I see a company that begins to, let's say, spread information and they're saying safety first, my radar goes up. And my radar goes up because safety first is just empty rhetoric. It's just a statement. And I don't live in Missouri, but I tend to have the perspective, like, I'm from Missouri, show me state, right? Don't tell me that you are a safety first company. Show me by the way that you run your company, by the way that you value those individuals. And I'm also acutely aware that there are plenty of companies out there that number one, do exactly what they say they're going to do. And number two, they value the skilled tradesmen and women that they employ. So they want that safety culture, if you will, to be robust. They want everybody to be safe. They want everybody to go home the same way they came into work. And that's a very valuable way to operate. But on the flip side, I'm also acutely aware of the companies that are out there that do exist, indeed, that do not value safety. It is seen as a drain on the bottom line. That is how it is viewed, because, quite frankly, it costs money to be safe. And the only real reason that they even give any kind of credence at all to any kind of safety issues, to, like, let's say PPE, for example, or having any kind of training whatsoever, is because the prospect of not getting a job is high enough that they give it some kind of credence. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, the prospect of getting fines and the like are steep enough that individuals, via companies, will actually spend something in the pursuit of, kind of checking a box, if you will. Which brings me to the article of today. So I'm going to reference this article and I'll make sure to quote it, and I'll also leave it in the description of the various show notes so you're able to see it. But I'm a big fan of OSHA. I have been for a very long time. I happen to believe wholeheartedly, because I know history. I know history, and if we look back at how many people were dying, so on average, just to lay a little bit of groundwork before we get into this article that I'll reference in this podcast episode. If you go back and you look from a historical perspective, the average is 38 people died a day. So 38 people were dying every single day on average back before OSHA became an actual entity and it had some merit, some teeth to be able to enforce job site specific conditions, job site specific safety regulations, if you will. And there are people that are, it blows my mind actually, but there are actual people, and politicians included, who are against OSHA. There is a single line item bill. If I can find it, I'll make sure to leave it in the description show notes. But there is a single line item it is in, I think it's out of Arizona actually, where I don't know if it's a state representative or a senator who puts it in and is looking to abolish OSHA. Yeah, you heard me right. That individual, that politician, is looking to abolish OSHA. Now, this blows my mind for a number of reasons. Now, the premise, I believe, is that this individual thinks that it belongs at the state level, that safety belongs at the state level. Any kind of let's say government entity, at least that purports to target safety from a company perspective and workforce, it belongs at the state level. I happen to disagree. There's a lot of evidence out there that from when you compare right to work states with non-right to work states, there is an increase in injuries and illnesses. And when you compare the data from right to work and non-right to work, it's pretty crystal clear. And some of that is from a legal perspective, meaning we're going to sit here and stifle the way, which is one of the things that this article kind of talks about. We're going to kind of stifle what is taking place, but we're also, what's really happening at the core level when you start to compare the data between right to work and non-right to work is that you begin to see it's a safety, you're diminishing safety culture is really what you're doing at the expense of trying to extract the last dollar that you possibly can. And again, I'm not saying anything negative about the pursuit of wealth, but I am saying it when you're sacrificing people's safety on the altar of doing that, which is where the kind of dynamic, conversation comes into play. There are politicians and certainly company professionals, business people, etc., who would love to see OSHA either eradicated or severely curtailed. Many of them have been able to get their wish when it comes to, like, let's say, the Department of Labor, National Labor Relations Board, etc. These are all, quite frankly, these are mechanisms that are designed to protect the American worker. And the next one in line, to be blunt with you, is OSHA, and from a safety perspective. So with that little bit of groundwork laid, and again, I'm not a unsympathetic safety manager to what takes place out in the job site. I'm there, right? However, OSHA has a lot of merit. OSHA has significant value, and I would take anybody to the mat, if you will, that has a bone to pick with OSHA. If they're not doing their job, that's a particular problem. but the existence of OSHA and the regulations would not exist at all were it not for the federal mandate and when we basically the act that created OSHA in the first place. We certainly are, from a populace, American worker, we certainly are more richer, more vibrant, and definitely more safe with this stuff in mind. All right. So while I was looking into a specific, let's say, I'm a member, I should say I'm a subscriber of Industrial Safety and Hygienist News, ISHN. And so when I think it was the March, when the March editorial and the whole magazine from a digital perspective came to me, I was like, let's go ahead and flip through this and kind of look through it. And I found it, there's an article that is by their chief editor, and it's titled "Fatal and Non-Fatal Injuries at Long-Time Low, 2026 BLS Report Reveals." So, and I'll quote this at length just to kind of make sure that I don't miss anything, because I don't want to be accused of, let's say, just kind of guesswork and nonchalantly, a generalistic overview. All right, quote, "There has been some news of note from OSHA and the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the last couple of months. Each year, the BLS releases the most recent data of worker injuries and fatalities. Historically, the data has been released in November, but was delayed this time around due to the government shutdown in fall of 2025. This most recent data covers 2024. According to the latest BLS survey of occupational injuries and illnesses, released on January 22nd, 2026, the overall non-fatal injury rate in private industry hit a 20-year low of 2.3 cases per 100 workers. The Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries, released February 19th, 2026, shows that 5,070 workers died from on-the-job injuries in 2024, a 4% decrease from the previous year. The national fatal injury rate also declined to 3.3 per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers. This month, I, being the editor, wrote an article using the BLS numbers to break down OSHA inspection. Now, that was end quote, by the way. This next section here, this is what I find more interesting. So I don't have the data yet, and I was unable to kind of get into it. And quite frankly, when I was looking up some OSHA statistics, they really had up to fiscal year 2024 kind of put out there, which some of it I'll kind of get into. But this next piece, this next part of the article it's in the same magazine, ISHN, but it references several times a New York Times article that I'm not paying the New York Times to just be able to read this. I wanted to go back to source material, but it's there, and because they reference it, I just wanted to let you guys know. If I can get a hold of the link and put it in the description, and if somebody wants to go and they actually have a subscription, by all means, you're more than welcome to go check it out. But for the most part, I'm not really all that interested in the New York Times, just so I can have the data when ISHN already kind of gives it to me. So the next section is titled OSHA Inspections Drop in 2025. Quote, "The New York Times recently reported that OSHA inspections have decreased since President Donald Trump took over. Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat out of Massachusetts, publicly released the data that shows a 20% decrease in worksite inspections by OSHA during a 6-month period in 2025 compared with the same period in 2024. Warren's office said that the data shows that between April and September of 2024, there were 29,229 inspections, compared with 23,531 during the same time frame last year. In its 2026 budget proposal, the Trump administration said OSHA would conduct 24,929 inspections during the fiscal year. In a letter, to Labor Secretary Lori Chavez DeRemer and David Keeling, OSHA's assistant secretary. Warren and 5 other Senate Democrats said that inspections over that same period yielded 42% fewer willful violations, end quote. Now, this is astounding to me. One of the things that I really, really want to, like, let's say, dive into, I want to see, number one, the actual data. Again, I can wait. The New York Times is reporting that 42% fewer willful violations. Okay. What I'm very curious about is why. So, in other words, and it was quite clear that the number of actual investigations going out, as far as job site inspections, the number going out has indeed decreased. Right, so there is really like no way to spin that. If we are reducing the number of work site inspections, first off, there's not enough to go around anyway. So I'll give you a little bit of the data that I have when you go directly to OSHA's website. And again, this link also from OSHA's website, I'll also link in the description show notes in case anybody wants to fact check or data check what I'm getting ready to tell you. But OSHA has approximately 1,850 inspectors. Approximately. This is obviously, well, if somebody decides they're going to go ahead and drag up or quit, for those of you who aren't in the trades, like moving on to a different job, etc. But approximately 1,850 is a number that not only do they reference, but that you can use fully. And according to OSHA, that covers 130 million workers on over 8 million job sites. So if you're doing the math, what this means is that there's about one inspector for every 70,000 workers. Can one inspector really be in charge, if you will, of 70,000 workers? Yeah, we already know the answer. It's no. But the existence of the framework, the existence and the potential for anybody who may have to, let's say, answer to a potential inspection, it's enough out there that oftentimes it will curtail the dismissal of safety altogether. It doesn't, I mean, there are companies that will make that gamble, that will roll that dice and say, I'm just not going to do safety. They're just blatantly just not pay any attention at all. I know at least a couple of different companies that I have communicated with, the employees of those companies, where the employees were paying for PPE, which is that's a direct no-no. And I also know some who they pay no attention whatsoever to any kind of lead remediation. And what they're doing then, of course, is providing outside of the fact that there's a whole lead issue that you can deal with on OSHA, the general duty clause says that companies are to provide a place that is free from recognized hazards. In other words, lead paint is a hazard. You are supposed to remediate that, especially where any hot work welding is going to take place, because of the substantial health issues that it brings up. It's one of the reasons why lead paint has been, kind of ixnayed anyway, and we've kind of substituted something else. So I know that there are companies out there that will roll the dice and just completely do not give safety any credence at all. And they will do illegal things, to be sure. But overall, there's a fair amount of contractors and companies that will at least attempt to meet the letter of the law, if for no other reason, because number one, there is always the possibility of having a job site inspection, or let's say having someone kind of drop a dime on you, rat you out. Whistleblower is the correct term. And secondly, the potential for, let's say, not following suit with any kind of safety regulations, meaning the downstream liability. I got hurt on the job. I can directly blow the whistle saying it was because you, the company, was negligent. Next thing you know, it could put a company out of business or whatever. So those two things seem to be, let's say, a deterrent, if you will, for a lot of companies to actually do what they're supposed to do, at least checking a box. Many companies, and by the way, before we get too deep into this, I want to make sure that I'm not broad brushing and I'm not generalizing here. There actually are companies that go well above and well beyond, let's say, the letter of the law to provide places that are free from recognized hazards, to provide good places of employment for their employees. There are a lot of companies like that. And I tip my hat to you if you happen to be listening to this podcast episode or someone shares it because they want to say thank you for that, based in comparison to the places that don't. All right. So I'm not saying that there are, companies out there. There are some really good companies out there that go above and beyond with their attempt to protect labor and, their most valuable asset and their most valuable resource, which is the human resource that enables the capital to be generated from their labor. So those people are out there, those companies, but there are also some bad players. So when you have one inspector for every 70,000 workers, there's people who have done the math and say it would take somebody X number of years to be able to even visit job sites. And, on the construction side of the house, job sites change because the second that you step on the job, you're beginning to work yourself out of one. So there's that. And one of the industry's, what I'll say is remarkable things is this concept or idea where companies essentially hire safety managers to help them, let's say, meet the letter of the law. Some of them, again, there are plenty of companies that say, hey, look, we want to have a robust safety culture. We actually care for people. But there are some who, just, I need a safety manager. The industry has made significant strides in the past 25 years. And I'm pretty, let's say, I'm impressed, quite frankly, at the level of safety and the importance of it and how it's been elevated, if you will, with regards to that, in comparison to the companies and the bad actors. For my part, I wish my podcast could be slam full of people who are, let's say, whistleblowers, who want to blow the whistle on their company. If you're not doing, and I'm talking about bad actors, I'm talking about bad actors. I'm talking about the ones that I was just talking about. You're charging people for PPE, man. If there was documented evidence of that, you could definitely take them out. And the reason why I say that, and it sounds kind of shisty to some people, but if your business model is run on exploiting people and breaking the law by making them pay for PPE and completely disregarding job site safety issues like lead paint, and et cetera, then maybe you don't need to be in business. Because what you're doing is placing other human beings in direct harm, and there's long-term exposure issues. I'm harping on the lead paint thing because I actually had somebody call me who I knew specifically, personally, and he said, I'm starting to notice shortness of memory and slurring my speech. These are direct signs of being exposed to lead, having lead poisoning. And the company, they knew that what they were doing is right or wrong, excuse me. And so the reason that I bring all of this up is because if there is one inspector for 70,000 workers and you have a bad actor that does not care for the letter of the law and will roll the dice, well, then how do you keep those companies accountable? A lot of it's going to stem from a company's need to stay under the radar. And if they can, then they will. And then when they will, they'll continue to break labor law. They'll continue to expose employees to unsafe conditions. They'll continue to charge their employees for PPE. They'll continue to charge their employees for negligence and for penalizing them, quite frankly, for trying to be safe. This is a travesty. And here's what happens. If you want to begin to tip the tide, I don't want to take too much away from the actual purpose of this podcast episode, which is the OSHA inspections drop, but this is all tied in nice and neatly to begin to turn the tide. you have to raise awareness. And while this podcast, the whole platform in general, I am open to having any conversation with someone at all about if you can document it. If you have documentation, well, everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket nowadays, right? So you're able to then take a photo of your paycheck. You can redact things and say, look, my company's making me pay for PPE. All right, let's get the ball rolling. Because if we're really talking about the OSHA inspections and they're dropping, if they are, which we're going to get back to this article in a second, but if the actual OSHA inspections are dropping, if there is a covert effort, if you will, to basically handicap OSHA to a certain degree, then it's going to fall, unfortunately, to the workers that are out in the field to be able to hold their company liable. And how do you do that? Well, that's very simple. And it's simple, but it's not easy. And the reason why is because there's the potential for blowback. And then you go, well, what recourse do I have? Who can I converse with? How can I sit here and do this? You can indeed talk to OSHA. One of the things that I think people, workers in general, when we're exposed to unsafe conditions, we know that they're unsafe, and the company knows that they're unsafe, is to continually apply pressure. That's, as bad as that sounds, if you want change, you're not going to get it if you're just sitting here hoping that they're going to be magnanimous and generous to you, and they're going to keep you. The only deterrent, as I said earlier, is going to be the fear of an actual penalty or a citation. And if the inspections are indeed dropping, if that is not just political, a political ploy to kind of damage the opposite party's reputation, but it actually happens to be something like this covert thing to henpeck OSHA for the business community because they don't like OSHA because it costs them money. There's that. And then the second reason, of course, is because of downstream potential liability. Those are the really only two things that are going to keep an honest company or even an unhonest company attempting to be honest. And so in that context, then, if that's the case, then I would argue that I would articulate that if you have, I always say, first off, go through the proper channels, go through the proper, chain of command, if you will. Talk to the individuals that are directly over top of you from a supervision perspective, your foreman, your safety manager, if there is one, the point of contacts, and you move on up the chain about specific hazards. But if not, right, there are bad players out there, and bad players most certainly need to be called out because bad players need to not just have their hands slapped. But whenever you have bad behavior, and this is at the crux of what we've got going on here with this article that I'm reading in OSHA inspections drop. I don't care what the bad behavior happens to be. In this instance, it's OSHA and the safety problems that we encounter on the job. If you have somebody doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, you have here's what it says. This is the law, if you will, or regulation, and they're not supposed to be doing it. If you don't fine companies, if you don't hold them accountable, and this also applies to individuals, by the way, but if you don't hold people accountable, and in this case, companies, then you are either you're going to incentivize them to continue to do this, to continue to put employees in bad positions, to continue to put employees in compromising and unhealthy, unsafe positions because I can make X amount of dollars, and it's a formulaic expression. I can sit here and go, well, how many times am I possibly going to be, let's say, inspected? And if this is the case, if inspections are dropping down, my chances of continued exploitation have just increased. So you either have that taking place, or you're disincentivizing people from being unsafe by hitting them with fines. It's one of the two is what it boils down to. I'm either going to do what I'm supposed to do or I'm not. And if the fines aren't big enough, if the fines aren't frequent enough because somebody actually is a bad player in the game and they keep people unsafe and they keep, making people pay for PPE, etc. If you have bad players like that and they don't get any kind of fines, the threat of one, especially if the inspections are dropping, is not a threat at all. All you're really doing when you lower the amount of job site inspections, etc., and the possibility of people putting out evidence and demonstrating that these companies out there they exist and they're doing this, then what I'm really doing in this case, as a government entity, is I'm incentivizing companies. I'm encouraging them, if you will, to actually break the law and to do things unsafe. That's what we're talking about here. That's why I'm so intrigued by this specific thing, because in the grand scheme of things, when we begin to look at this, I want to make sure the real crux is I want to make sure that this is not a political divide issue and make sure it's an actual legitimate issue when it comes to what's taking place with safety. If that's the case, if it's the latter, it's not a political thing. It's actual, data driven that I can sit here and put my finger on and say, this is what we've got going on. If I can do that, then this story needs to be heightened and needs to be elevated and needs to be spread, because that's a bad thing. You're basically, like I said earlier, you're encouraging companies to continue to flout the law, to continue to put people into compromising and exploitative positions, and you're encouraging them to be unsafe, if for no other reason, because they're not concerned that they're not going to get a fine. And again, quote, in a letter to Labor Secretary Lori Chavez de Remer and David Keeling, OSHA's Assistant Secretary, Warren, that's Senator Warren, and 5 other Senate Democrats said that inspections over that same period yielded 42% fewer willful violations. Now, if that is, there's really only a couple different things. Number one, am I actually finding safe jobs? I've got a few questions here, right? Am I actually finding safe jobs? I'm also curious about what states this overall is conversing, because in my data that I could sit here and look at, there are several states that have state programs. Well, are they being considered, or are they not being considered? They at least have to meet federal OSHA regulations. They certainly can exceed them if they wish. So I'm curious about whether or not the inspectors, when they're looking at different job sites, are they, number one, finding actual compliant companies who are looking to keep their employees safe, or are we just seeing actual fewer job site inspections because we want to tamp down on OSHA's effectiveness? That's at the core of it. That's the question that we all should be asking, and it has me very curious. And the article continues, quote, included in the letter where Senators Angela Brooks, Tammy Baldwin, Richard Blumenthal, Alex Padilla, and Elizabeth Warren and Ron Wyden, these are all Democrat senators, they have launched an investigation into whether the administration may be discouraging inspectors from enforcing workplace safety laws, and whether the apparent decrease in enforcement points to broader plans to eliminate key safety regulations, end quote. Again, going back to what I said earlier, the crux to making this important is ensuring that it's not a partisan issue, that it could be conceived as a partisan issue, meaning, okay, one party is looking at this and they value this and the other party does not. Not a problem if that's all it does. But if it's really just a fishing mechanism for one party to smear the other party, then what happens is the real issue, which is indeed a real issue, the what is perceived as the reduction of willful violations. Why is that the case? This gets lost in the sauce, if you will. It gets dismissed because it's used as a weapon rather than, and I don't know the frame of mind. I don't know the reference point. I don't know what they're thinking. This is why I'm just bringing this up and I'm asking the question. If it happens to be a tool, a weapon in one party's hands to to kind of malign the other party, that weapon, the actual what really should be investigated, kind of gets dismissed and watered down and muddied off. But if it's an actual legitimate concern, it's not a witch hunt. We're not looking to malign one party. We're looking to actually get down into the crux of this because we want to protect American workers. There's validity and value in that then. And that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will, is that what we need to do this. All right. And the article continues, quote, the drop in inspections comes as the Trump administration has rolled back regulations for worker safety and protections, including efforts to close OSHA offices and offices that protect coal miners across the country. The Labor Department has also said it plans to pull back a requirement that employers provide appropriate lighting at construction sites and ease evaluation mandates for protective equipment for workers regularly exposed to dangerous chemicals, said the New York Times article. In the letter, the senator said, quote, you are not only rolling back rules that protect workers, OSHA also appears to be taking a lighter hand in enforcing even the rules that still exist, end quote. The group went on to warn lawmakers that, quote, if employers know that they are unlikely to face hefty fines, they may be less likely to adhere to safety standards that keep American workers safe in their places of employment, end quote. 100%. If the punishment doesn't fit the crime, if it's too weak, you're not disincentivizing someone from doing something. You're incentivizing them to continue to break the law. That's what you're doing. 100%. That's exactly what you're doing. And when it comes to safety, all right, this is if you ask me as a safety manager for a company who I really enjoy working for, and I really enjoy attempting to make them, we're growing, and I really enjoy attempting the continued increase through, strategy and et cetera. I also thoroughly enjoy the position that I have as a safety manager and to continually, being genuine and authentic about trying to keep the guys that we have employed, making sure that they're safe and doing everything that we can. And quite frankly, and this will be kind of humorous, but I really also enjoy getting into it with other, let's say, safety cops. And I'm using air quotes for those of you who are only listening, because safety cops are only there to justify their job as opposed to keeping the people safe that are working for them and are doing work for their customer base. I really enjoy getting into it with them, taking them to task, because there's a lot of bad information out there. A lot of people like to say, oh, it's an OSHA law and this and that and all this stuff. I really enjoy my job. And if this is true, if that the government is somehow, let's say, disincentivizing OSHA, we don't want you to do as many inspections. We don't want as many. If that is true, then it's pretty scandalous. It is the Department of Labor. There are numerous times the Department of Labor has been in certain anti-worker administrations. The Department of Labor has been run by a member, by somebody that's a member of management, and that's the track and the trajectory that they go. And what they really do is, rather than try to repeal it or they just keep it henpecked. They just keep it handcuffed. They just keep it ineffective is really the best way to term it. If I keep it ineffective, then I just, kind of stifle what we're looking out for, I should say. So it's not a surprise. It wouldn't be a total surprise to me to discover if this is true. It probably shouldn't be a surprise to you either, because we're looking to water down any and every, let's say, government effective agency in providing safety. But it's scandalous nonetheless if it turns out to be true. So lastly, what I'll do when I end this podcast episode is I'll give you a secondary stat. Okay. At the beginning of this podcast episode, I said that when OSHA was enacted back in 1970, right? And then it, kind of the OSHA Act in 1970, and then they get started in April of 71. The average number of individuals who would leave home and would go to work and would not come home was 38 a day. 38. It's a pretty substantial number of individuals who would go to work and they're, were looking to provide for their family only to not come home from unsafe acts. 50 plus years later, you can do the math, 70, 56 years now, 50 some years later, that number, it changes. I had to look at the number, but the one that I usually like to talk about when I'm teaching an OSHA class is we've gone from 38 people died a day to somewhere, just depending on the year, let's say 11 to 15. And people look at that number and I say, do you think that OSHA and what they're doing is actually helpful and actually working? I already know the answer. The heads begin to nod. Yes. But here's the thing that I also begin to open people's eyes and really just kind of roll back the scales. I say in 1970, we went from 38 people dying to 11 to 15, right? So we've dropped or reduced the number of deaths on the job by 2/3. At the same time, we've doubled the number of people in the workforce. Now think about that for 1 second. I have reduced the number of deaths by 2/3 in at this time period, in a 56-year span. I have reduced the number of deaths by 2/3, all while doubling the number of people in the workforce, which makes that number that's 2/3 even more dramatic given the population increase and the nature of individuals that are in full-time or part-time in the workforce participating. That's a substantial return on investment. So for let's say the American worker, and certainly for the business protocol that we have in this country today, I hope and quite frankly pray that a reduction in willful violations of 42% that this article on ISHN talks about is due to finding safer jobs and not on trying to stifle employees and American workers from being able to speak out against exploitation and unsafe job conditions on the job site. More to come as the data rolls out. There may very well be an expose into increased safety and whatnot. There are a lot of topics to talk about. Lastly, before I jump off on this podcast episode, if you are interested in having a conversation with me here on the Wealthy Ironworker podcast, then all you have to do is look down into the description and click on the contact page link that is there. It will generate an email. I will see it, and I will reach out, and we can have an engaging conversation. I have had one. This has already been played out on my side with somebody from UPS, and I'm more than willing to have numerous conversations with a lot of different people about job site conditions. The more conversation you have, the more you shine light on what's going on. And with that, I bid you have a great day. Thank you for taking the time out of it to actually listen to me. Share this information out, and as always, stay safe out there on the job.